Perspectives in the post-foundation period of the Focolari movement. Eva Gullo, Alberto Frassineti. Insights into co-responsibility in organizations at the service of a charism.
Allora, siamo
We are Alberto.
Eva.
Siamo sposati da...
We've been married for 15 years.
We live in Lopiano.
And we are part of the Lopiano community. I qualified as an engineer, then I studied strategic business management. I have worked as a manager, and now I've been a consultant for more than 20 years.
On the other hand, I have a humanistic and psychosociological background.
Da 15 anni
For the last 15 years, we've been working for charismatic organizations.
cercavamo un lavoro
We were looking for work we enjoyed and found ourselves working in the vineyard of the King. These organizations have received the gift of a charism, and we serve them by helping the people responsible for governance to understand how to redesign the organization for an actualization of the charism so that it might shine out.
This work came about after several years, where we also developed and lived the experience of the economy of communion. It was the fruit of that experience. We also had the experience of an economy of communion business together with other partners, and also the experience of the Leonello Business Park and Lopiano, which made us grow and then encounter the life of charisms.
What are the characteristics of organizations at the service of a charism? Can the Focolari movement be defined as such?
Beh, partiamo dalla seconda, sicuramente sì.
Let's start from the second. Definitely yes, without a shadow of doubt, because it is an organization that was founded precisely due to the charism that the Lord gave to Chiara Lubick. And so it grew up around this charism to sustain it, to make it shine out in the world, to bring it to the world. Organizations at the service of a charism are very similar to many other organizations, but we use this word to indicate that there is a specific nature and purpose that is different from other organizations. The specific nature is that the heart of these organizations is made up of people who choose to give their lives for this charism. And so they are not bound by a contract, by a particular skill, even though there are skills and commitment, but they are bound simply by a choice of life. They identify with that charism. They feel that it is their calling for life. They abandon everything, they leave everything for that charism. And the heart of these organizations is normally made up of this type of person. We don't find this in other organizations, neither in profit-making organizations nor even in non-profit organizations. The second thing that characterizes these organizations is that the purpose, the objective, is not the activities, but the testimony of the charism, so that through the charism, people can have an experience of the gospel that is lived and thus encounter Christ. The activities that exist, and in some realities are very important, we are talking about hospitals, clinics, schools, and even huge social enterprises. They are all working for the splendor and spreading of the charism. So, the importance is not so much on the results of the business, but on sowing seeds of the gospel. This generates a particular organizational culture. For example, one cannot imagine taking working models or figures from other organizational cultures and applying them as outright equals, because one must respect this nature and this goal.
Let's
say that the culture is a way of doing and talking, a way of acting that at a certain point is a bit like the air you breathe. It gets taken for granted. And somehow we all find ourselves in it. And so organizational culture is also very important to identify with, to give us a belonging, an identity. And these organizations have specific characteristics that we rediscover from the organizational culture. And it takes time to change. It requires specific attention or care. And that's certainly a very important factor to reflect on for change and for transformation.
So, after the death of the founder or foundress, change is required. How can this be done while remaining faithful to the original charism? When a charism arrives on earth, so when the founder is alive, we have the coexistence of two realities, the charism of foundation and those gifts that the Lord gives to the founder to be able to put into practice, to incarnate it, to bring that charism into the world. The day after the founder leaves for heaven, all those gifts also return with him or her, and only the charism of foundation remains. But that charism of foundation is not handed over to the new superior general, the new president or council. It is handed over to the communion of the disciples, because each disciple is a person who has a small piece of the charism in him or her that they found when they met it. And so each one is also a bearer of the charism and a builder. And in our opinion, it is important to use this word, the disciple, that is the one who has made a choice in their heart. Psalm 83, blessed is the one who decides in their heart to travel the holy journey. In this sense, this is what disciples are. They are those who have refound themselves, seen themselves again in the charism, and who now receive the gift of the charism of foundation. But whereas when the founder was alive, the disciples' objective was to follow. They were the following. The day after the founder returned to the Father's house, the objective is no longer this following, but is communion, fellowship, which needs to understand how that charism of foundation is fulfilled in the present moment and for the future. So, it is the fellowship of disciples that receives the charism. It is the communion among the disciples that can understand how to actualize it and how to make it shine out in the future. And a lot needs to be built on this. We need to start from this to build the future.
Sì, è questo tema della comunione dei discepoli.
Yes, it's this theme of the communion of disciples that strongly calls us today to a different period in which we have no possibility of copying, because we really have to create it, to build it. And so the first question we must ask ourselves again is, but are we aware of this? Are we aware that this gift we received of the charism of the founder has arrived today and is also in us? And then from this awareness comes the responsibility, which in some way also makes it possible to build up co-responsibility. We know how important it is at this time for each of us to pay attention to personal growth, to look after our prayer life, our own life, even the spirituality. But then co-responsibility has to be built through caring for relationships in space and in time, places where we feel that the other's thoughts are just as important as mine are. And then sometimes I'll be called upon to have the courage to speak, to dare to say something I feel inside that I should give. Sometimes I really have to be silent in order to make even more room for a deep listening to what's happening around me at my side, and that we're building together. Above all, we need to understand fully whether that particular feature is something that has to stay and must stay or not. So it's a discernment. We're aware of this co-responsibility because of the subject of synodality in the Church, but it calls us to walk together in an ever more active manner, but at the same time being, how should I say it, knowing how to be very aware and then also able to act in many different ways. I'll give you an example that made me reflect a lot. So often in the decision-making process that we have to make, sometimes even together, how often do we realize that we must let go of our idea? But how often have we said to ourselves, first I'll give it completely. So we don't just put it aside, but we give it, and then we let go of it. And this detail brings about precisely in us a capacity to give everything. And then certainly, I don't expect that what I've given or offered is perhaps the solution. Here, there's tension between giving and expecting. And also, as it were, expecting a transformation that doesn't always come in our timing, but which nevertheless needs us. And if our contribution is lacking, our co-responsibility is lacking, and also our making the charism shine out, because then we're called to apply this in practical action.
What problems can be encountered in this process of actualizing the charism?
Partirei proprio da questa parola, attualizzazione del carisma.
I would start from this very word, actualization of the charism. There is a very important issue, for example, that when the founder is no longer there, the community rediscovers the dimension of time. Because the time in which one lives with the founder is an eternal time, in the sense one is in paradise, one is in the light of the charism together with the founder, and therefore one is more concerned with spreading the charism, if we want to say it with Pope Francis' Evangelii Gaudium, with occupying spaces rather than thinking about time, because one is already with the light that comes from the Lord, that comes from God.
Il giorno dopo che il fondatore torna alla casa del padre,
The day after the founder leaves for heaven, we rediscover time. We rediscover that we are in time, and we rediscover that we have time ahead of us in which it is up to us, at this point, to actualize the charism. And this rediscovery of time brings with it a series of problems. How we organize ourselves, what we prioritize. We have problems, how we handle them, and so on. And so, at this point, it is very important, for example, to understand what actualization means in the context of time. I say this with a phrase Don Bosco used to say to his disciples before he left them: I have done the draft in black and white, you will do the colors. So this gives us the dimension, said by a great founder, one of the importance of communion among the disciples, who will do greater things than the founder. Filling in the colors means enriching a draft. Here then, the day after the founder's death, the communion of disciples has this great opportunity and must be able. It is about communion together with co-responsibility, which Eva mentioned, which are fundamental in order to have the courage to dare to think of an actualization, even made up of new things, one which is always faithful to the founding principles, but which today, in this time, understands how it is the expression of the charism. And in the actualization, there is a second point. Having reached this understanding, one does not plan for the present, but one starts from the future. How do I see myself in 10 years? Where do I feel we are going? What are the needs to which I feel called to respond? And then, from the future, you go back and understand how I structure myself, how I organize myself in order to achieve that goal. So, from the present, we look to the future, and from there understand what the directions are. But to do this, you have to bear in mind that a charism is never a standalone thing. It always generates a systemic organization, let's say, that has to take at least 3 things into account at the same time, like having a table with 3 legs. It is certainly necessary to look at the charism sustainability, the charismatic vision, that is, what is the vision of that fellowship of disciples that sees for the next 10 years? We certainly need to keep in mind what is the vision of the economic perspective, because we must have the resources, which is not just money, it's also people. So we must have the strength to be able to put that charismatic vision into practice. But we must also keep well in mind the community, the people, and the relationships between them, because the charism lives on those things. So what is the vision for relationships within the charism, the relationships of the community? So are these three things needed as to plan a future? No, they are needed to understand how to walk, to understand where to go, depending on what the communion of disciples feels for a single goal, to make the charism shine out.
Far risplendere il carisma.
Eh sì, questo è un bellissimo processo che richiede.
Yes, this is a beautiful process that requires, above all, perhaps one point: being able to tolerate differences, to welcome diversity, and to love it. It's a painful process, because differences are also sometimes of generations, differences of cultures, of characters. Sometimes they also create tension, tiredness, effort. We were talking earlier about this tension between the cultures of generations where things were done in a certain way. And we feel that we still don't have everything clear about how it will be in the future, but it will certainly be different, and it will no longer be like it was before. So how do we make room? This is a process that constantly requires us to negotiate, to listen deeply, to really communicate completely. We have to face things. Maybe the word that most characterizes this period of transition is not so much the certainty of solutions, but the certainty that we are on the way, so as to address things together with co-responsibility. So the decision-making processes, the moments of sharing ideas, even if they bring us problems, we know that we'll go through them. We live them with the idea that my idea may not be the solution, but it will be our solution, and I will welcome the other person's idea, and it will become ours, even if it's different, because I will feel I'm participating, I'm involved, and there will also be conditions that will allow this. So there'll be the possibility, as we were saying, of spaces, places, listening, and also facing conflict from a constructive point of view, from an evolutionary point of view, and therefore to face things, to realize that each and every one of us is needed in journeying on together, and in trying to recognize that together on this road we will discover all these colors.
In questa strada.